Good morning, 5th grade. Today we're going to continue reading in our novel, The Birch Bark House. Before we get started, we have a quick write. It says, from what point of view is the novel The Birch Bark House written? How does this point of view affect your understanding of the characters? All right, and so you need to think about who is telling the story. And we know that an outside narrator is telling the story. Okay, so that lets us know it's third person. And then we need to think about, do we only know one person's thoughts and feelings? Do we know more than one person's thoughts and feelings? Or do we know no one's thoughts and feelings? And in this story, we know more than one character's thoughts and feelings. Sometimes we know Amachius's, sometimes we know Pinch's, sometimes we know Mama's thoughts and feelings. So we would say it's third person omniscient because it's told by an outside narrator who reveals more than one character's thoughts and feelings. And this affects our understanding of the characters because we're able to know a lot of details about them because we know all of their past evidence. All right, press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. Our question for today is, how does the point of view change how we, the readers, understand a story? Our vocabulary words today are perceive, and that's when you become aware or conscious of something. You begin to understand it. You perceive it. The next word is somber, and that describes dark or dull colors, maybe a gloomy attitude. So this picture is somber. And then the last word is reverse, and that's when you're going in one direction, and you actually do a U-turn. You change directions. You're doing the opposite of what you were doing. Go ahead and turn the page. And we're going to finish reading chapter 9 on page 133. And at this point, Amachius is learning how to sew, and all the women are sitting around sewing, and they ask Amachius for a story. And Pinch is called outside by the men to do manly things, I guess. And so it's just Nokomis telling the story to Amachius, Tin Snow, and Angeline. All right, so at the bottom of page 133. Once again, the women and Niwu were left alone. Now Nokomis said, I can tell you an old story about my grandmother. She looked tellingly at Mama. You know the one. Gaget, said Mama, only half teasingly. Do you think they're old enough to hear it? I was 8 winters old when it happened, said Grandma. Same age, same as Amachius now. Then tell it, Amachius begged. Yes, tell it. All right. Tin Snow put down her work for a moment to beg laughingly along with everyone else. We'll stop right there because we have information about our character and our setting. In box 1A, you would write, Amachius, Angeline, Mama, and Tin Snow are listening to a story that Nokomis is telling. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the setting. And in box 2A, you would write, all of the women are in the cabin listening to Nokomis' story. The men are outside. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. All right, and now we're going to use our CSPS strategy for Grandma's story. It's called Fishing the Dark Side of the Lake. When I was just a little girl, said Nokomis, her voice lilting high and dropping low, her voice far away, I was told by my grandfather, who I lived with, who raised me, never to fish on the dark side of the lake. Why, you wonder? I never knew that either. Never found out until, of course, being a young girl and very curious, I took my grandfather's canoe out one day while he was sleeping. I put my fishing spear and nets in the canoe. I would fish where the water was deepest, strangest, bluest on clear days, and blackest on cloudy days. That's where I paddled. I had a stick and a line. I let it down, baited, and waited to see what sort of fish I would catch. The wait was long, my grandchildren, and as I fished there I grew uneasy. We'll stop right there because we have information about the character and setting. In box 1B, we would describe Nokomis. We would write, when Nokomis was a little girl, her grandfather told her never to go fishing on the dark side of the lake. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the setting. And in box 2B, you would write, Nokomis decided to go to the dark side of the lake anyways because she was curious. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. We're at the bottom of page 134. I remember my grandfather's warnings, the way he insisted that I was never to approach this deep water. I'd seen him looking out there sometimes at sunset, his eyes sad and clear. Sometimes he mentioned my grandmother. She had gone away young, I knew that, not much more. Her favorite food, he said, was fresh plums. She could stand beneath a plum tree and eat all day, he said. When he said that, he smiled. Fresh wild plums, I had taken dark red plums with me. As I sat in the boat waiting for the fish to bite, I put them slowly, one by one, into my mouth. What was wrong with this side of the lake? I had to wonder. Except for the depth and darkness, it wasn't much different. I would find out what was different, I decided. I kept my line in the water. My bait must have been wrong, though. My bait must have been no good. I didn't get a bite, even a little nibble. Maybe, I thought, Grandfather told me not to fish this dark side of the lake because no fish lived here. That would be a joke on me. Just then I looked over the side of the boat and spilled all the rest of my plums into the water. Saw! I was disgusted. Down they went to the bottom. Not long after they sank from sight, though, I had a strong tug on my line. Then, not just a tug, a real pull. I'll stop right there because we have information about Nokomis' problem. In box 3A, you would write, Nokomis waited for a long time, but she didn't catch anything. She thought her bait was no good. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. You write down this quote on page 135. My bait must have been wrong, though. My bait must have been no good. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. Go ahead and turn the page. Soon I was struggling to keep from being dragged overboard. I had caught something very huge. A hand reached out of the water, pulled itself up my fishing line, finger over finger, fist over fist, until suddenly the beautiful face of a woman appeared. She looked at me and kept climbing. Do you have more plums? She asked. I said no, but I helped her into my boat anyway. Her hair was black and endlessly long, covering her, and underneath it she was naked. Her smile was gentle, her skin was purple, gray, cold, the color of those plums. There was something familiar about her, something awful and yet familiar. I was very much afraid and began to paddle quickly back to Grandfather. Still, I was a curious child. Who are you? I asked as we traveled along. I am your grandmother, she said. Here's what happened. Long ago, I married your grandfather. We could not be parted. We were like one person, he and I. He was stingy with me. When I bore our first child and lay her in his arms, after she grew for a year, I became my daring self again. I became again the wild girl he'd loved from the beginning. One night I dared him to swim with me in the lake. We went out in our canoe to the deepest part of the lake, the darkest and the coldest side, where you have found me. We threw off our clothes. I dived in deep as I could, pulled my way down, until I reached the bottom. My dear grandchild, that's when I got lost. It was so dark down at the bottom that I got turned around, could not find my way back up again, and so tired I curled up in the cold weeds and I went to sleep until now. My grandmother looked toward the shore. Her face glowed in the twilight. I saw as we approached that she was watching my grandfather as he came down the path from the camp to the edge of the lake. He walked closer, closer. Something strange happened. I rubbed my eyes. I passed my hand across my face. I could not believe what I was seeing. As he approached, my grandfather's steps seemed to pick up life. His hair got darker and darker until it turned the pure black of his youth. Lines disappeared from his face. He straightened his bowed back. Just as our canoe touched the shore, he smiled, and oh, my grandchildren, suddenly he had all of his teeth. I got out of the canoe. He looked upon me kindly, said goodbye, and then took my place in the canoe with his young wife. The two gazed into each other's faces with great happiness. I watched the two paddle away into the darkness, into the night. 2 shooting stars passed through the sky. The lake was silent. I never saw my grandfather, but eventually his clothing was found on the shore, washed up on the dark side of the lake. We'll stop right there because we have information about the solution. In box 4A, you would write, after Nokomis drops some plums in the water, her grandmother climbs into her boat. When she gets home, her grandfather rows away with her grandmother forever. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. And for the quote, you'd write down this quote on page 138. I watched the two paddle away together into the darkness, into the night. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. When Nokomis finished, no word was spoken. Amachius could say nothing because stiff hairs prickled at the back of her neck. She couldn't get the sight of that hand reaching out of the water from her mind. Tin Snow and Angeline were wiping tears from their eyes. Mama sighed and continued her work, slowly, carefully, on Angeline's shawl. Perhaps she was thinking of the big gathering where Angeline might meet someone to go away with, far from her mother's gaze. Although she didn't want it to happen, it was inevitable, and Yellow Kettle's fond look said all that was in her heart. How deeply she loved her children, how dear they were to her, the center of her life. Being naturally cheerful and bold, though, she soon grinned and joked. Yellow Kettle could not help turning the mood her way, and soon everyone was laughing over Niwu's tumbling and Andeg's playful squawks as Niwu followed him, grabbed for him. Andeg knew how to stay just out of reach of those chubby, curious fingers. We'll stop right there, and you can go ahead and turn to your paragraph. It says, what challenge does Amachius face? What does her response reveal about her as a person? And so in this chapter, Amachius is learning more about Nokomis, and she learns about how Nokomis's grandparents were separated and then reunited.